Jason?
One, two, three, four, five. I don't see Joe. Is everyone ready to get going?
Yep.
Apologies for that. I won't put Tom on the spot, but I think we all had the same issue. So I think we're ready to go. Tom, let me know when you're ready to stream. I hear some background noise. I don't know if it's my audio or if it's just a muffled connection. Could someone else just talk? I don't know if it's just Tom.
I can hear that too, Jason.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're good connection wise before we go. Kathy, you look like you're trying to talk.
I just said that sounded like Tom in the background.
Okay. So Tom, we couldn't hear whatever you were saying, but I see that we're live on YouTube and we're recording, so I'm gonna call us to order unless you flag me otherwise. All right. I'll call the Southborough Capital Planning Committee to order for Monday, August 10th. It is currently 7:37 a.m. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Southborough Capital Planning Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and/or the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event they were unable to do so despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. So with that, I will move to item 2, approval of meeting minutes from the July 20th meeting. Are there any comments for Jeff? I just had one very minor one under where it's at the end where we list the references, Jeff.
Yeah.
I don't recall ever actually using the capital plan for any part of the discussion, so I think we can strike that unless someone disagrees with how that. I mean, we had Chief Achilles for most of that meeting, if I remember correctly, based on the minutes, etc. Are there any other comments, edits, etc.? All right, so I will move that we accept those minutes with the one minor edit. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Braccio. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Cook,
Abstain.
Park.
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Pfaff.
Aye.
And Malinowski, aye. Passes. Chairman's update. A few quick items here. The townhouse engineering is approaching its final stages. I'm told we may have a report as early as this week. Once we see the content of the report, John Parent is going to draft a application for CPC so that the town can continue to engage in conversations there to figure out which pieces and or all pieces they may be willing to sponsor as an article at town meeting. Stay tuned for which town meeting. But I think our goal I think we said it multiple times last time, and I think it continues to hold true. We want to have shovel-ready projects, even if we're not ready to move and get the right appropriations at a town meeting. We want to be ready to go so that if the board does call a town meeting at any point in time, we have a list of items that could be brought forward. So we're continue to move, full speed on that. In the worst cases, it sits on the shelf until next spring. Is kind of the worst outcome that I can foresee it at this point, and allow us to have at least one project kind of ready to go under our belt. Any questions on that? Next one is BOS meeting, which is next Tuesday, August 18th. I've had extensive back and forth with the chair, Mr. Healy. And it really started when Mark sent out an email to multiple department heads and committee chairs looking for, if there were to be a fall town meeting, what items would you be looking to potentially have on a warrant? And I had put forward that we do have a few capital items left over from the spring, mainly the hook lift truck, the SCBA grant match, which I'll call is newer, but makes sense in terms of the timing. And obviously we had extensive conversations on the chief's vehicle. The last time we did not take a formal vote, but obviously we will take a vote if there is going to be a fall town meeting.
Jason, what was the second thing?
Hook lift, SCBA grant match from fire department. So really what it was is if they get the $250,000 grant, there's a local match. The good news is I was actually on a webinar from my department the other day. FEMA will have all announcements out by the middle of September. So either Chief Achilles will know on that particular grant, whether he got it or whether he didn't. So you'll probably be able to know. It's 13,000, but we'll know whether we have to bring that forward or not. The other thing is, depending on what Congress does in the next couple of weeks, there are various versions of the bill that increase the funding for that specific grant program. So you could get a no thanks letter and then be applying the next day for a grant. So again, something to keep monitor of. But the goal of the BOS meeting is going to have a few, I think, flavors. One is we've met extensively since COVID started. We've actually never had an in-person meeting, if you really think about it. Probably the only committee that can say that. Bring them up to speed on everything we've done, where we've gotten the capital plan to date, the discussions that we're having. Even if they're kind of in process, I think it's important for them to know where we're going. And bring forward a few requests. One are going to be just in our charge. We were supposed to make a pretty formal report by September 1st. We're obviously not ready, mainly because we don't have the schools. They haven't been at the table with us at all. Not, I think we all know why they haven't been. But what I was going to ask them to do is update our charge to be more along the lines of an initial report by September 1st, with a formal report by the end of the calendar year. And then we'll check that box immediately that night with kind of the initial report. I think the other ask we're going to have of them is based on our vote at the last meeting was on South Union School, to get an appraisal of that, to start, continued dialogue of where they want to go with that, or if, because ultimately they would have to sponsor any article to go to town meeting. I have posted an agenda for that meeting. There is no attendance required per se. Typically what they do, especially in the Zoom setting, is they'll pull me in as chair, I'll give the update, and then they'll ask for public comment. I always do it in case anyone joins, and especially given that Ms. Brascio is going to be on the other side of the table, so to say. There's already two of us there. So I don't like to take chances in that stuff. So we post an agenda, but by no means does anyone have to go. I definitely would watch the replay, because I'm sure they'll all have feedback for us in terms of where we're going. Sure, Lisa, your feedback's probably already captured in our meetings, but nonetheless, I think those are pretty important updates of if they agree with the direction we're going, or if we need to change course as well. Any questions on that?
Yes, the South Union appraisal. What are you asking the Board of Selectmen to actually do?
We're going to give them an update on what we've talked about with South Union to date. And we're saying we are exploring whether it makes sense to keep that building in the inventory of the town. So to do that, we think that we've done almost as much as we can as a ad hoc capital committee. And it's going to be up to them to decide whether they want to move the process forward. And, our job, I think, is to educate on costs this much to operate per year. It has this much in capital. And what I've also done, which is part of kind of 3C of my update, is I've already reached out to youth and family and recreation, who are both going to have meetings prior to that and provide feedback on, like, they're the actual users of the building, right? So I've pretty much given them an open forum to say they really like the idea, they really don't like the idea, so that then the 5 members of the board can decide, all right, I want to move forward on this, or I'm really concerned about this. I've also reached out to the Historic Commission, given that it is on the National Registry. Again, there are already protections in place. My understanding is there because it is on the National Registry, but I felt it was important just to get all potential views in town before, the board deciding whether they would move forward with something along those lines of exploring, what the value would be with a third-party buyer.
Jason, can I
Anything?
add one thing to South Union?
Go ahead.
So I'm wondering if it might be useful to put a feeler out to Shopsy as well. I know they're looking for opportunities for affordable housing, and they may want to weigh in on South Union, whether through CPC funds or not. It's something they may be interested in converting into if the opportunity arises. It just might be useful to get their information or their feedback as well.
Okay.
And that may be
Yes.
premature at this point. I don't know.
Okay. And Dorian's the chair currently?
She is.
Okay, I'll reach out to Dorian.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that? Again, I think it's important. No one's making any decisions that night, right? I think it's just, do we continue the conversation, or, maybe the board says, we have no interest in doing that, consider this building staying in the inventory. I don't know, right? Like, I think we just need to take their temperature of where they want to go. But I think the next item we would suggest is an appraisal. All right, so move on from chairman's update. Capital planning with the school committee. I had a preliminary conversation with Mr. Challen, who's the chair of the Southborough School Committee. It was a very good conversation, is how I would put it, in terms of the tone, the willingness to work together. Not that I'm surprised based on any of the interactions I've had with him in the community over the past couple of years, but where we are going with this is, obviously schools has a pretty important decision they need to make this week. But once we get beyond that, he was going to survey his board of whether any of them even have interest in being part of some committee to look at, kind of the big question in the room of, do we consolidate schools and what do we do with NERI, right? So he is going to get back to me. I expect we'll hear this week of whether they want to be involved or not. But he did say, regardless of whether they have members that would want to be involved or not, he would anticipate a pretty heavy request on this committee, given he views this committee having kind of the expertise in terms of the longer term planning. And obviously, if they chose to kind of just attend our meetings but not be members of a formal committee, we'll have to talk about subcommittees and all of that if they do want to have a formal kind of standing committee. But if they chose not to do that, we'd have to just then think about how best to drive it forward, what data we'd need, and he would obviously work with the schools to do that, to get the right data. So I think we're making progress. I think this is the way I explained it to him is, and he said no pressure was his response to this, but what we decide to do with Woodward and NERI really dictates where we go with every other building and capital project in town, building related, over the next 10 years. right? It impacts Corderville, it impacts the library potentially. And it impacts, this concept of a community center that has been thrown out around as well.
I would, and Lisa, help me here. I'm really surprised that was his reaction. Not that he's not a consummate team player, he is, but in the past, school committees, and rightly so, have always thought that the decision as to whether we close a school or not is theirs to make and theirs to recommend. It doesn't mean someone else couldn't, but it's very unlikely politically that it would ever go very far without the support of the school committee. So I'm surprised that he wants us to lead the charge on that versus something similar to what we had a few years ago when it was looked at.
Or at least, Kathy, in addition to that, at least them take a formal position on where they have an interest or not. Because I know even from the Board of Selectmen standpoint, when we've talked about potential for Woodward, all those discussions have been noted that they have to go through, those discussions really start with the superintendent and the school committees.
Yeah, and I think where this is probably going to play out, right, is once they get beyond, they've never had to make decisions like they're making in the length of the meetings that they're having, right? They make some of our planning board meetings look short now too. So, I think we really should, regardless of what they come back with, we should really have a joint meeting with them once they have the time. And then I think that will kind of chart this out, but I expect that will come hopefully in the next month once they get past some of these hurdles this week.
Hey, Lisa, I don't see how this decision goes too much further or as far as really getting to a conclusion until Park Central gets resolved one way or another.
Yeah, I know with the number of units going in there, I think it's 10% of the housing stock that may have an impact on the schools. I know the initial study said it was minimal, but that's really hard to tell, until you get further down the path with that.
Well, I don't know how they could say it's minimal without knowing for sure what's going to be built and who's going to buy the units, right? If it gets built. But the numbers I've seen would have a big impact on the schools. In Masson Place only added 20 kids, but at one point it was 3, now it's 20. So anyway, enough of that for now, but I think there's so much involved in that decision that we're a long way from being able to truly have the support and numbers to know that we can do this.
And I think too, Kathy, I think the study was probably more so done on, and I'm trying to remember, it was done initially when it was going through the ZBA phase, but I think it was on the rental units more so, which would be similar to Madison Place, but I think there's 120, 130 market rate homes in there as well, which you're right, may have some larger form of impact, but I don't remember if that was in the study or not.
Okay. So I think more to come on that. Obviously, nothing is going to happen quickly on that, right? So maybe some of the stuff will play out. Item 5 was public communication and input. Most of the adjustments and discussions we've had related to the capital plan have all been with department heads, most of which are not residents. And it dawned on me that we probably, there are probably a select few people that follow these meetings, is my guess, but the broader public isn't probably aware of what we're doing. Obviously, they'll become a little more aware if they follow BOS, but not kind of some of the subcommittees. But I was wondering, in looking for input of, do we publish something, looking for the public's input of, maybe there is a capital project that isn't even on our radar screen. It didn't even get mentioned to the master plan committee when they were going through it because someone missed a form or something along those lines. Something as simple as a note to the blog of what we're doing, in soliciting input, we could get no response, or we could get some responses that maybe aren't in line, but at least I want to be able to say, we've considered all aspects, right? Because what I don't want to have happen is we come up with a capital plan here, we all feel really good about it, and some capital project comes out of left field that is an emergency in nature. It's more of a want than anything else, and it gets traction in the community, and we didn't have it on our radar screen and aren't set up appropriately to maybe be able to fund it, right? Maybe it's a really good project that none of us have thought about or no department heads thought about. So just want to measure the committee's temperature on that and how best to capture that.
I think it's a great idea, Jason. And I think another avenue of outreach is through the recreation email chain that they have that reaches thousands of people in town. So I think there's a lot of avenues, and if done right, I think we could get a good response. I think in the past, some of the surveys and stuff that have been done, I think have been a little lengthy, and I think the shorter, the better, as to what we're looking for as far as feedback would be the better.
Yeah, I think I like your idea of a blog post with the comment section versus a survey. I think we keep the survey for when we have some optionality. But if we want specific feedback, basically comments, then I think that's a good avenue.
So I don't rely on the comment section too much, just given some of the stuff. If we went the blog, I would want a form, right? And actually the town's website does this. You can actually create a form that would log it essentially, so that we know, and we don't have to, they don't have to give their name, right? It's always good to give their name because then we can have follow up, because usually there's questions on, well, what did you mean, et cetera. But I think, we could create a simple box, like literally one question: what would you like to see in Southborough? Here are some of the things we're already considering, right? And we can list out increased recreational fields, right? Because recreation has a bunch of items coming up in about a 5-year time frame, right? We're already considering what to do with the library. We're already considering what to do with the transfer station, already considering what to do with the schools. But like, what are we missing, right? We're considering what to do with the senior center. My guess is we've got 90% of it encompassed, but I think what I'm hearing is better safe than sorry. Just make sure we get everyone's input.
I think that's an excellent idea. And Andrew, I think I agree with Jason. If the comments on the blog tended to be more constructive than they usually are, I'd say, yeah, do the blog too.
No, I agree that works. I just didn't want to get a survey with kind of like insert your comments or other. I think it's good. It's like, give us your idea on a form, and then once we collect those, synthesize it, then we can put together a survey.
Yeah. Okay. I will get that out there. All right. So item 6 is updates to the capital plan since the last meeting based on department head feedback. So in early July, I had a discussion with Mark and Brian just to understand, had the 5-year outlook that we kind of started with way back when we were formed, that had been shared with advisory and BOS, which didn't paint a rosy picture. Had any of that changed dramatically, right? And I'm not even going with the COVID type stuff, right? I'm just talking about, has something changed in their assumptions, anything like that? Because I think we've now gotten to a point, hopefully from a COVID perspective, that the state has released more guidance on local aid. So I think there's more guidance there that is favorable, which is good. But it was clear to me that the numbers were not going to even be palatable to a good discussion. So instead of just trying to match to a number, what I did was I went back to each department head and said, here's what you have in the plan that we basically inherited. We obviously beat up the items that went before town meeting in June. But here's where you're coming out. Are these numbers still good, right? And are these projects even still valid? And I think what I found, I'll give you kind of a synopsis is, some of the numbers were really stale. Some of the numbers were thumb in the air, sort of best estimate when someone was asking for a capital plan. Some were, hey, I don't know how we're going to fund it, but I know I need it. I need to put it in there. Some were as simple as Corderville Hall was in there 4 times. for 4 different things, but we know based on the discussions we've had with both John Parent and Bill Harrington, you can only put about just over 300,000 into that building before having, tripping all the ADA standards, which would greatly increase the project. So instead of having 5 different projects, we've kind of consolidated them. So you have in the packet and in kind of your detailed capital plan a reconciliation of everything that changed. My view is they were all favorable to us in terms of it either pushed an item out that just wasn't ready, it lowered a cost, or it spread a cost in a more reasonable manner as opposed to doing a lump sum. The example of that was what we discussed and voted on at the last meeting on the fire turnout gear. Instead of buying it all at once and buying maybe gear that you don't need, buying it when Chief Achilles needs it and having kind of a recurring line item as opposed to lump sum line items. So what I guess I'll do is I'll open it up to the committee. My goal at the end of this is to vote and accept each of these recommendations so that we have a baseline. But I need to know, obviously, if anyone has questions on any of them or any of the descriptions to be able to do that. So I don't know who,
Yeah.
do you want me to go in alphabetical order? Do you want to all? Jeff, I saw you unmuted,
Yeah.
so go ahead.
So, couple questions on here. Most of them are DPW related, and I think maybe we might need some more context from Karen on some of the changes, potentially. And some of the things they were split out, but the cost went up. So I don't know if that's a function of just having stale data that was updated from a previous version. Questions on like the plow. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Keep going.
Questions on the plows and things like that. Is it the actual physical plow or is it the actual truck and the plow? Because it seemed pretty low if it's the latter. If she wants 4 plows for 40 grand, that seems.
No, it's not the plow that would be on the front of the one that would plow your driveway.
Right.
The one that plows like the larger street. So it's
the entire vehicle plus the plow.
Just the metal piece, the plow.
Just the metal, just the thing on the front or the
Okay.
side.
All right, that's more reasonable then. Okay. Yeah, just some very specific questions, mainly about why things were increased and I don't know. Maybe I'll see what everyone else has before I start going into even more detail. But
Okay.
Do you want to go
Kathy
one
or
by one on
Andy?
these?
I can go one-on-one if you want, unless there are certain, like, it sounds like Jeff has questions on DPW. I don't know where everyone else is.
I had questions on Cordigal Road. That was one that I was.
Yep.
That's actually, we're going to talk about road street maintenance in Corderville when we get to agenda item 9, but that is definitely a good question.
And then the other one I think I brought up before was the many roofs on all the schools in different places.
My view on that is that should be part of how we think about the school capital plan, right?
Yeah.
Like like in terms of NERI, right? They have 2 items scheduled for town meeting this year in the spring. But I think fundamentally, at least where I'm at in my head is, should we be throwing money at NERI that way? Or should we be dealing with NERI in a much more holistic, longer term view, given the age of that building? I don't know the answer to that question, but that's kind of what I think we need to get into with the schools. So
yeah,
definitely we'll get to your Corderville, because I'm sure we all have some of the same questions.
Yeah, I think the question for the school one too, is it something similar to the boiler where the roof's 20 years old, so they can ask for a new one? Or is there a report saying that the roof is in imminent need and it needs to be replaced ASAP?
Yeah, I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I do know that there was a funding request that already went in for SBA funding. I believe it's on Neary Mark. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
So just because we get it doesn't mean we have to accept it. Right, but I know the boiler was obviously an interesting conversation in and around town meeting time.
And that was approved, right? The boiler. So that's excluded from this.
Correct.
All right.
Yes, they went flying through town meeting, no issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
I mean,
mainly just the Neary roof is the largest bonded project from the school perspective.
But
Mhm.
I agree with Jason. I don't think it's worth our time right now because there's so many related issues to be decided before you get to whether you're going to replace the Neary
Right.
roof.
Right.
Yeah, which I think it's a little premature to be going to MSBA for approval. I mean, the problem is we had with the boilers, they had it, they didn't want to lose it, so they kind of forced our hand. You know, it just seems a little early.
Well, I wouldn't describe it as forcing our hand. I describe it as maybe something else. But with any of the roofs, I don't know what the application looks like, but they certainly should be exploring, the solar project that would pay for the whole thing. But
Right.
again, you got to decide whether you're going to keep Neary.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep schools off to the side.
Yeah.
Just in the interest of movement. So let me do this. Let me walk through the themes of each of these buckets, and you all tell me if you have any issues. So the recreation line items at the top of the reconciliation, they had a very, very aggressive capital plan when Tim Davis started. And his view that he has reiterated to me many times, and he has validated this with the commission at each step, is they're going to come up with a longer term plan. They need to get all the projects they currently have off their plate before they start bringing forward new ones. So all these are simply pushing them back. A lot of these were slated for this year or next year. So really kind of takes them out of our plan if we're kind of looking 2 to 3 years out. Obviously, they still will be part of a 10-year plan. So we'll need to figure out kind of funding sources. Are these all valid projects, all that stuff. But for now, that's the genesis there. So any questions on those?
No, I just think we should also look at, privatizing some of that, like that soccer academy that was looking to be built on the other side of town, or some of that kind of stuff,
So I believe Don Dumont, who's on the rec commission, has spoken about some of those same themes in the past, if I'm not mistaken. So I think you'll find common ground there. Next is fire. So all Chief Achilles did here was, instead of having multiple, like a bigger tranches, he broke them up into 2 smaller tranches. And he discussed a lot of these at the meeting we had back in May. The last one on his list, IV pumps, this is actually a requirement that's likely coming from the state in terms of a piece of equipment they have to have on the trucks. So that's why that one's new, as opposed to something that, was split out from something before. Any questions on fire?
No.
The schools, all we did here was Brian took their capital plan and put together a potential bonding schedule. Remember, obviously bonding comes down ultimately to the conditions when we actually bond, but we were showing them in the last version. So the version that we are kind of reconciling this to, we were showing them all as general fund, appropriations. These projects are too large to fund in 1 year. So all he did was just spread it out. Any questions on that? The next 3 related to Corderville Hall. This is what I already referenced, right? In terms of taking multiple projects and bringing them down into one, based on what we know for ADA.
Jason, one question on this, if I may.
Go ahead.
So do we know, my understanding is that the 325, which is the max allowed, is based on a 3-year period. Do we know what additions or may have been done, is that number potentially lower as we look forward? Because I know the bathrooms were just done or getting done, approved to be
It does
done.
take into account the bathrooms. It also takes into account some work that was done, I think, last year. So what
Okay.
John Parent did is he went to Paul Sabelli, the assessor, got the latest property card, multiplied it by the percentage, and then
Mhm.
reduced for the bathrooms. Something that happened last year, which I don't remember what it was, then he put in a small cushion for like, they are in the building doing stuff every year. So just, he didn't want to be like to the penny for obvious
Okay.
reasons.
That's perfect. Thank you.
The next item was the townhouse bathroom and interior renovations. Based on the staff that John Parent has right now, he's basically taken that project from being an external project to more of an internal project and cut the project almost in half in terms of what was in the capital plan. It's primarily going to be focused around bathrooms, and they've actually painted a good chunk of the townhouse, is my understanding, during COVID. This would be one item, to be honest with you, if we were to have a special town meeting in the fall and the financial considerations, right, which I don't think we know yet, right, in terms of where free cash falls out and everything else, this would be one item that I personally could see potentially moving forward from next year to FY21, or at least having discussion about it, especially whereas you kind of look at occupancy of buildings, right? We're going to be at an all-time low of occupancy in these buildings for the foreseeable future. So naturally, some of these things will be cheaper and more operationally effective to pull off than what we were all used to 6 months ago. So nothing to do on that now, but I'm just throwing that out there to kind of start the conversation if the Board of Selectmen actually want to hold a special town meeting. I think that's kind of the first discussion. And they're doing that on the 18th, right, Lisa?
Yes.
There'll be a decision. So we'll be able to come back pretty quickly after that.
Jason,
and-
sorry.
Right.
So like for the library,
Mhm.
that would fall under facilities on these charts.
Yes.
So maybe we should also see, well, there's limited people allowed in the library along the same lines of what you just said. We may want to do that for some of the other buildings as well. That if there is work that can be done, now might be the time to do it.
Yeah. And I think, right, the balance there, and we can, that's definitely something I want to talk about when we talk about the detailed review of the FY22 capital plan, is which items would we even consider? Because I think, Lisa, if I were sitting in your seat, right, in terms of what items could potentially be coming forward, for a fall town meeting, is it worth it or not, to do it, and what are the reasons? So
Well, I think it's more than that. We've got a estimated year-over-year tax increase that is low, but it's also in line with the economy and the effect of the virus on people. I don't know of anyone that wants to appropriate free cash for fiscal year 21, because that would put us in a hole for fiscal year 22. So I think we have to be very careful and think about the impact on the fiscal year 21 estimated year-over-year increase. And I say estimated because there's still things that go into it besides the budget that got approved. So I would be really hesitant to start throwing stuff into fiscal year 21 that's not there already, besides the things that we had already contemplated.
yeah, I think
I could see throwing, if we had some kind of capital project that's FY22 that we were going to use, this year's free cash for next year, you could appropriate some of that for this year and move.
But then, Andrew, that start, we talked about this. It puts you in a hole for fiscal year 22.
But you wouldn't have the expense that you were going to have in fiscal year 22. You're just moving your fiscal year 22 revenue and expense into fiscal year 21.
All right, we will see.
So I think, so on that, I think both points are very valid, right? I think what we need to do is get the year-end results, which we'll have, by the end of the month, is my understanding. So we'll be able to see, hey, is there even an opportunity or not? And what does that opportunity mean, right? Then I think we can all form educated views on whether it makes sense or not. Okay. Lines 156 to 160 fire. These were just some items that Chief Achilles had added that were not in the original capital plan. I believe he mentioned or hit on most of them at the last discussion. Remember, this list has been building for about a couple of months now, right? Because it goes back to June 22nd. So then going into DPW, what Karen did, big picture, is she took all her vehicles and kind of projected out what a replacement plan should look like, buying vehicles that have greater utility to them, as opposed to like a truck that functions only 3 months a year during the winter, and it's only good for plowing, but it has no use to them during the spring and summer months and fall months, sort of thing. So that's what she did. I would say in general, what I noticed as I was updating this was most of them either got pushed back a year or stayed right on schedule. Some of the splits that Jeff, you might have been referring to, were some of these trucks are used in the water fund as well. So how that all plays out, right? Because the water fund is obviously funded by the users of the water, as opposed to anything that hits general fund is funded by all of us pro rata in some respect. So that's really what she did, but a lot of it was just moving 1 year. Not a ton of movement in the overall cost. There were a few things I think she moved. And the only thing that I saw that moved up pretty significantly was this chipper. But my understanding is the chipper is long overdue for replacement. But we'll get to make a formal review and vote of that before we get to the town meeting in the fall. Sorry, the spring. So that's an annual town meeting item. In terms of the plows, because I know Jeff, you had mentioned both of those. There are actually supposed to be 4 plows replaced as part of the 2020 town meeting, or three or four, and then the other 3 or 4 were supposed to be this year, 2021 town meeting. That all got pushed back a year. That's why you're kind of seeing an incremental, because when they updated the capital plan, the line was struck completely, and so you went all of a sudden from 7 down to 3 plows. But I think plows are pretty important in New England. So, are there any general questions other than road, sidewalk, in Corderville Road on DPW?
I would just think, Jason, for all of the equipments or vehicles that we have or equipment, like it would be interesting to know to what you're talking about, like what's the use? Like, okay, it's going to be used 2 months of the year, 3 months of the year, 6 months out of the year.
I will get her to add that to her schedule.
Like we estimate, okay, the chipper is only going to be used in the fall when we do chipping. Okay, well, maybe we rent a chipper, or, we're going to use a chipper all year long and we're going to chip ice in the snow. I don't know. But just kind of knowing that we're going to use the stuff, I like the idea of having multi-use vehicles that you use as a sander or a dump truck. I think that's a great use. But, like street sweepers, you only use street sweepers during a certain part of the year. So do you need one sitting around for when you're not using it?
So Andrew, I was going to bring this up when you got into your leasing versus buy discussion, but what you just said is so on point. So a few years ago, advisory took a look at leasing versus buy to see if there were some economic benefits of leasing. And we specifically looked at a street sweeper because you only use a street sweeper once or twice a year, and only for a limited period of time. So it looked like it was the ideal candidate to lease from a company that then takes that and moves it around town to town and should save us money. So we looked at it, and it clearly was going to benefit us financially to do that. Did a lot of work, did a lot of spreadsheets, presented it. By the time we went back to check to see what was going on, it had already been bought. And the response we got was, we really didn't understand your spreadsheets or why it would work. So we've got some education to do along the way as far as the lease versus buy, but that's one that's the perfect example of one that probably should have been leased. and not Bob.
What about not just specific to the seasonal leasing, but the whole discussion, Andrew, you had last week about leasing these vehicles in general, what those would look like?
Yeah, I mean, we can lease
Let's-
anything.
Hang on, let's wait, we have an agenda item for that coming up. I just, all I'm asking for on this particular agenda item is that we're okay with the general concept. This does not mean that we support the exact timing, the exact amount, or the way of funding of each of these, but just that nothing is so egregious here that we shouldn't carry it as a placeholder or accept kind of the recommendation from the department head in terms of what they've changed.
The only
That's all.
specific, sorry, Jason.
Go ahead, Jeff.
The only specific one I had that went up by significant amount was the service dump, utility dump, went up by like $100,000. So curious as to why, whether, to my point earlier, was it stale data or is it just something happened? Some incremental need came up.
I'll have to go back to Karen. I don't remember.
Okay.
Some of the items down at the bottom in terms of facilities, I just split out. The cost didn't change, but what we did is I split it out. It makes the pivot tables run a lot better in the capital plan, just line by line, as opposed to the way it's drawing some of the data.
Mhm.
The next one for fire department PP, this is what we talked about and voted in favor of at the last meeting in terms of splitting that cost over a much longer time. I think there's still open question. I think Andrew had raised is, do you lease PPE or do you buy PPE? And we'll get to that sort of broader conversation. Police department cruisers, again, this is it's a recurring item. Some years they buy one, some years they buy two. I just split it out just for optics and we can adjust as we go. I will say that I have had a bunch of conversations with Chief Paulus in the last week about that specific item. The cost of cruisers is fluctuating greatly right now. So he is looking at he's not wed to one model, I guess is what I would say. And so he is looking at some options there. So we're carrying currently what he had in his budget for capital in terms of number of cruisers and the cost per cruiser, but he is going to come back to us once he's done some more homework. He's just, what I've heard at least is there's significant delays, obviously, one due to COVID, but two due to certain manufacturers are taking a stance on what vehicles they're making and not. So he's just looking and trying to understand what his options are before zeroing in on one or two items. The next one is IT related. I went to Tom to ask him to confirm what he had previously told us last spring. He indicated that the server costs initially are much larger than what he'd been carrying. So it went from 60 to 90K. Kathy knows this best from what he did for us on public safety building. Tom will leave no stone unturned to get that number down, but I told him in the interest of making sure we're not short selling the need, especially given IT infrastructure probably being one of the most important capital things we invest in right now, that we'll up it to 90 because we know he has a hard quote on that in terms of what he would need, but obviously give him time to work that down before it would ever go before town meeting, because that is a spring town meeting item. So I just figured I'd give that background before someone just thought that the cost magically went up for no reason. Utility carts, Karen just removed that. That was an item that was 8 or 9 years down the road. And then, we added all the bonded articles, and Brian did a fresh look last week on making sure all the bond payments that we currently know about are in the capital plan, so that when we look at kind of the pivot of funding sources, we're looking at what a total cost is coming out of the general fund every year, regardless of whether a project is appropriated or bonded. The only thing that is missing is there's about $2 to $3 million left of the public safety facility that's on a temporary note this year that will be permanently bonded soon. That will add to our, obviously, because we're going to start paying principal plus the interest. Brian, my understanding is there's a short-term and a long-term note there. Some was for some more of the personal type property, and some is just longer term, the final sort of expenses. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
So I think going forward, this list is gonna be a lot more manageable. But I don't know that we're working off a baseline that, we didn't come up with, right? And it was just kind of pulled together as departments submitted requests over the years. So I think trying to put more rigor around the process has helped this. And I think, the department heads were incredibly responsive and open to new ways of thinking about things. So I know that's not always the easiest thing, but I think that's, they're just looking to get all their potential needs on the table and understand what we're then trying to do in terms of fit everything together, right? And not look at this in a silo. So any other questions on this? But everyone, I guess, in terms of process, I think a motion just supporting that we discuss these, it's not indicative of a future support, but we discussed, maintaining these updates in the capital plan, that way we can vote at a future meeting to remove something if the need arises. I think is the right way to do it. That way there's a clear track record of it. Does that make sense to everyone?
Jason, would you think it would be possible to add to this, like anticipated funding source? Like bonded over 7, bonded over 5, bonded over 3.
On the
appropriated?
summary?
Yeah, might be helpful.
Yeah. It's just a matter of just adding it when we add it. So I probably won't go back and do it, but I'll
Yeah.
probably going forward.
Yeah, going forward, man.
Okay. All right, so then I will move that the committee supports the adjustments to the capital plan as presented in the summary of changes tab. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Cook,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Bath,
Aye.
Malinowski, aye. All right, so now we're gonna go into where I think a lot of you probably want to spend some more time. And this is actually, like, if we were not talking about a fall town meeting and we were just talking about a spring town meeting, my goal is that by October, I'm not gonna say early or end, that we are sitting in front of advisory and we are sitting in front of the Board of Selectmen saying, here is your capital plan for the year. And these are the items we think absolutely merit moving forward. It doesn't mean that if the town hit dire financial times, that we couldn't pull something back later on, but it would really, I think, change the process of how this is done moving forward in terms of oftentimes capital needs are the easiest things to just move along from, right? And we have some deferred maintenance I think we've inherited as capital planning committee. But I think it would really allow us to put a good stake in the sand of this is what we think is a reasonable capital budget. Obviously, we'll come back to the table if financial considerations, need fit, but then it allows advisory and BOS the time to vet and support or ask for more information well in advance of March, in terms of typical timing for an annual town meeting. So this is kind of a preview of what is slated still for FY22 in terms of what we would bring forward in FY21. I'm going to leave road maintenance in Corderville off to the side. But what I would like to hear from the committee here is my plan was not to have every department head come back in unless we had a strong desire, need from any of them to discuss it, especially when we've talked about some of these things before. The main items that I think warrant further conversation is I don't think we've talked about the DPW office building. I think we very likely could be in a situation on South Union School, depending on where the BOS goes, that gets removed or pushed back until further consideration can occur. And I think, we're going to have to wait and see the outcome of some of our school discussions over the next couple of months to figure out how best to move forward on Corderville and whether it's Corderville or somewhere else for that need for the senior center. I mean, that's kind of my big picture review, but I'm open to thoughts of who else the committee wants to hear from. Again, absent roads, sidewalks, and Corderville, because we're going to have a much broader conversation about that.
So to restate what I think you just said, is your plan to try to finalize the fiscal year 22 capital plan sooner rather than later?
Yes.
Present that, but understand that the longer term plan, which has a lot of interrelated decisions that have to be made. I mean, there's a critical path in my mind. Park Central's got to be resolved, and school committee. I mean, it all revolves around whether we're going to have 3 or 4 schools, right? As far as all the different ways we can go. And we are a while away from having that done. So we're just going to focus for now on the short-term plan. We've got the longer-term plan at least laid out, but there's just so many critical decisions to get to what we really would recommend in the end. That's kind of what your proposal is.
Yeah, and the only thing I can see on this list for next year that would weigh into those decisions would be the Corderville Hall item, potentially South Union, and Neary. Everything else is either a vehicle or infrastructure outside of those decisions. It's a heck of a lot of DPW stuff, to be completely honest with you.
Well, there always is. I mean, that's where your big equipment is. But I don't see how you get to South Union again until you make a decision. You got to know where you're going to put people, right? And to know where you're going to put people, you got to know what you're doing with the school. So it's still, to me, it comes back to that decision. Lisa, are you guys, is the BOS definitely going to decide on the 18th whether there is a fall town meeting or not? Is that your goal?
So it's on the agenda, Kathy, and Paul Semino's coming in as well. And I think the board, Marty's intent is to definitely have a clearer path, than we have now. So I would tentatively say yes. And Mr. Purple can maybe add to that if he's had discussions other than I may have been privy to.
Yeah, Lisa, my only comment would be that my conversation with Marty, I think they fully intend to, the board, he's going to push the board to make a decision on the 18th, because if there's any chance of us doing this, having a special, again, some of the articles that were indefinitely postponed really haven't been fully vetted. And I think some of the boards and committees or sponsors really need to get some of that work done. And we're also kind of constricted a little bit by the primaries and the presidential election. So I really think our sweet spot, without putting the clerk into a really bad position, is probably the first or second week in October for all of that to happen. So yeah, I think the board really, Marty wants the board to make a decision on the 18th.
Mark, can I just ask, do you know if we'll have input from the chief and the Board of Health, what their thought process is on another town meeting, at the meeting on the 18th?
Yeah, my intention is to get their input. So we'll have their input as well as the input of the article sponsors as to whether they see that there is a need for us to move forward in the fall, or whether their articles could be pushed to the March meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And keep in mind, I guess I probably should have said it just in maybe stating the obvious. To the extent there is no fall town meeting, this list will change. We're going to have the 3 items that I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting would theoretically be added here for consideration. Chief's vehicle, hook lift, SCBA.
Jason, can I ask a question on South Union?
Sure.
So as we have it on the plan and as we consider potential going forward, can we get a list of what the actual costs are for the building? I mean, I don't know, maybe we'll find if looking at the expenses on the building, it may be cheaper to rent some office space. I mean, I don't know.
We have that. It's
You do? Oh.
$35,000 a year.
I'm sorry?
It's 35,000.
Okay,
And then and if you add in insurance, it's about 37,000.
okay,
To pay
thank
that.
you. I didn't realize we had that. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, Lisa, I share that same view is
Yeah,
especially when we look around what's happening to the corporate office, right? I think we all know where it's going to land quite honestly, but and
Yeah.
whether it's going to be in the suburbs or in the city or both, but I think especially the departments that if we're looking at a temporary fix, not a permanent fix,
yeah,
I think we need to be open-minded to things like that. And that is part of the outreach I did make to recreation and to youth and family is
okay.
if we didn't have a permanent spot for you for a few years, right? The timing doesn't perfectly line up, what would you do? Right? Like, what would you need? Like, is it just the same office space you have now? Like, are there any considerations that we should know about sort of thing? Just because I don't think any of us know about the day-to-day operations of either of those departments. So best for them to answer.
Right, and I think now is like in real estate, I mean, I think there's a lot of companies that are up in the air, so now might be a good time if we're going to explore that to even see the cost of an office, renting some office space might be a lot cheaper now than it may have been 6 months ago as well.
There is a lot of empty office space in Southborough for sure.
Yeah.
But Lisa, there's also room in the schools for.
True.
And that, so
offices too.
that's a fair comment, Kathy. That was part of my conversation with Roger as well. In terms of, we're also looking for some temporary space. And I explained that, so that is, they're going to come back to us on that as well. I don't know exactly what the answer will be. Obviously, they need to figure out their spacing in a COVID year first, but obviously, hopefully we're going to move beyond this at some point and they'll be back to somewhat status quo.
Okay, thank you.
So is there any, I definitely feel like we need to have Karen come back and walk through her list. I think there's some questions on both short-term and long-term on her vehicles. Are there any other department heads you want me to arrange to come to a future meeting based on purely being able to make a vote on FY22? Based on what you see now. And obviously we're gonna have further conversations with the schools. It really would come down to facilities, fire, IT, police, and recreation. If they did that, that would be a CPA or rec fund article. It would not be general fund, it's my understanding.
I think maybe just a quick conversation with facilities on those two lines that you had mentioned, DPW office. I don't recall hearing about that in the past.
Okay. I'll even see if John can put in an email.
Okay.
Okay. So I will arrange for Karen to come to a future meeting and then go from there. The other thing that's missing from here, mainly because we don't know where we're going to go with it, is we obviously have our conversation with John Butler at the end of the month, right? I think if anyone thinks you're going to walk away with a clear recommendation from that meeting, that's not John is going to present us the facts. Then we're going to have to talk about them, but there's obviously going to be heavy input required from Public Works Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen, right? In terms of how they want to carry that operation forward. If to the extent we're going to continue to operate a transfer station in any sort of way similar to what we have now, we all know that there's extensive work that needs to be done there. There is no placeholder in the budget, which it could come as early as next year for what we would do there. So I'm not going to just put an arbitrary number in there because I think it just doesn't suit. But I think that's one thing we may have to thread the needle on, is depending on where that analysis comes out, is that end up being more important than one thing that's on this list, or do we have the financial ability to absorb it? I guess it's the latter is not going to be true, but I remain optimistic that we'll figure something out. All right. Now, I apologize that this was 9 on the agenda, but I think it is a good conversation. DPW, discussion of road and sidewalk maintenance appropriations. So as many of you know, you can see in the capital plan, for many years, we have a number we allocate every year to road maintenance. That number has fluctuated over the years. It's currently at about 325. Karen then takes that number and bundles it together with Chapter 90 funding about every 2 to 3 years and goes out to bid and does a bunch of roads at the same time. As opposed to, she doesn't spend the 325 this year, then go do another 325 next year, but she waits and bundles it, right? But obviously the town budget cannot afford, you know, $1 million, right? In any one year per se, from an appropriation perspective. New this year on the capital plan is sidewalk maintenance. So I asked her thoughts on this. She liked it, but I want the committee's thoughts. Is my view is that should be bundled together, like in terms of road and sidewalk, in that the labeling should be as such, so that the town can make the decision as projects come up. Is this sidewalk more important than this road, or vice versa? It just would give flexibility. You could still use it all for road, or maybe you have one big sidewalk project one year, but to bifurcate it kind of limits us in terms of when's the right time to go out to bid. What opportunity exists that's out there? Like I just look at the recent, I know wasn't successful, right? But there's a lot of programs that are out there in terms of the shared streets program that I think they went for something on Newton Street. You know, having a leeway in terms of how we rephrase this will open up the possibilities of what we can do for it and have more items shovel ready, but I'm not wed to the concept. I just think it was difficult when you had one item one way and one item the other way, because I don't know that any of us can anticipate what actually the need is going to be 2 to 3 years, not from a road perspective.
Yeah, Jason, I'd agree. The maintenance side was like a one-time capital cost. That was like that sidewalk project they did a few years back that say, we're going to do, you know, whatever the top 5, the top 10 on that list. And it's a one-time kind of, you know, capital cost to add sidewalks where there wasn't versus just a straight maintenance. I think you may put all the maintenance together.
My only concern is, Jason, is if I'm a member, Joe Public, and I don't necessarily track things as well, and I see a maintenance item for sidewalks, I'm going to track, because sidewalks are such a hot topic. I know, you know, I know in the group discussions I've had with people, you know, everybody wants sidewalks. We know it's not feasible at this time. There is a top 10 list. I would just worry that if somebody says, well, we're putting $200,000 a year into a sidewalk, what sidewalks have been done? And if it gets used for road maintenance, then is it a misconception for the public as to what that $200,000 may be? Does that make sense?
Yes, let me ask this question, Lisa. Don't projects go before BOS, before the funding actually gets utilized? Like, is there another check and balance here or not? Or like once we appropriate a town meeting, I thought there was something with Chapter 90, but I could be completely wrong. I don't know, Mark, if you know the answer. Is he Kathy shaking her head no? Lisa?
I don't think so, but Mark can answer it better.
No,
Karen's got her plan, and then she
Yeah.
executes her plan.
normally they don't come back before selectmen after the funding is in place, Jason.
Okay. So,
And
so
the
the
Chapter
other-
90 money is just for roads. It's not for sidewalks. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong about that. And the only reason that the roads go in a warrant article is because she does do multi-year contracts, and we don't want the money to be closed out at the end of the year. So it stays in a warrant article and just accumulates, and that's how she uses it. So she doesn't have to worry about spending it before the year end is up. So so that's truly maintenance. That's just the annual road maintenance. So to me, sidewalk, if we're talking about capital, building new sidewalks, that's different. I don't know what we do on sidewalk maintenance as far as that goes. So I'm not even sure how to answer what we're talking about here.
Mm-mm.
So the other idea I'll throw out there is I think, Lisa, I think you said this, but correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of sidewalks being the hot topic. We could take sidewalks out of kind of this yearly appropriation and go forward with a one-time, I'll just throw it $1 million, just for, like, if Karen had budgeted 200,000 a year for 5 years, right? If you go for a bonding of $1 million for sidewalks, right? And you kind of then have some sort of decision-making process of, is now the right time to just go and do that top 10 list and knock it out, but you pay for it over a 5-year time period. Aren't we, absent interest, pretty much in the same spot, but more accelerating the progress on that, as opposed to, like, I think what you're inferring maybe is like we put Band-Aids on things, right? And string it along as long as we can, versus kind of just do like a big one-time thing, but not to spread the cost out kind of as anticipated, and take this would take sidewalks out to remove kind of any bundling of that. And you could also think about the same thing from roads, which will lead us to Corderville, is like, do you give a certain bonding authorization? We can put the right protocols in place that it would also require approval of BOS advisory or none. I mean, right, but I think more checks and balances are always better. Like of what the plan is of how to use that, bonding authorization. I just look at how funds are available right now and the cost of such funds, in the ability to bundle and have shovel-ready projects. I think we are just leaving something off to the side by, like, we're doing a good job allocating every year, especially on the road maintenance, but are we doing well enough, right? Like, should we be out in front of this and just say, if this great opportunity presents itself, just go. And we know that we have the ability to fund it through bonding as opposed to a one-time appropriation.
I'm with you as far as what you're talking. I just don't know why we're conflating annual road maintenance, which is repaving roads, fixing potholes, with building new sidewalks. I don't know that we've got a very formal sidewalk maintenance program. I think she just does it when they can. I mean, my sidewalk never gets, we do it ourselves over on Pine Hill Road. So I don't know what sidewalk maintenance really means at this point. I understand what road maintenance is. We've spent a lot of time on that. So I still think that conflating road maintenance with sidewalk building is not the appropriate thing to do. That it is a separate discussion. It is one that needs to be approved by Board of Selectmen, et cetera, to make sure that we've got a plan as far as the right sidewalks to build. So I just don't know why the two go together, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of along the same path, Kathy. So Jason, I wholeheartedly support having some form of maintenance or something coming every year towards sidewalks, building towards being able to do a sidewalk project. I think that's great. I just worry that if it's lumped with road maintenance, sometimes road takes the preference maybe over sidewalks. So I don't know how we reconcile that, but.
So if we keep roads separate, right? Do we think, if we stay on roads for a second, do we think the right path forward there is to continue to appropriate every year and have Karen do it every 2 to 3 years? Or do we do a bonding authorization that covers you for 5 years, but allows you kind of to capture some of these larger projects? Because we have essentially a massive project. We know Corderville Road needs to be done, right? Now, Karen could just use this road maintenance that has been appropriated the last couple of years and get her Chapter 90 funds, get, I think, the grant programs, Complete Streets, and fund it. But then everyone else's road in town would essentially suffer, right, as part of that, right? Because you soak up funding from 3 years for one road. Now, it's a long road, it's a main traveled road, et cetera. That's why I think she always had it called out. But I want to figure out how best we want to advance the road maintenance. If we want to keep these separate, how do we just, are we in support of the status quo of how she's been doing it? Or is there other options we want to bring to the table and have a further conversation, just to prep her for when she comes back before us?
I would say you break out maintenance versus large capital projects. like maybe it's a dollar threshold or something, but fixing potholes or, you know, putting a new coat of tar on top or whatever you need to do for maintenance versus, you know, rebuilding or building a brand new road, building brand new sidewalks, you know, making a road bigger, whatever it is. I would consider that more of a capital-esque project versus, you know, straight up maintenance.
And one under our bailiwick more than the annual road maintenance. I would say we've got so much on our plate right now. That's one thing that works pretty well. Karen's clearly got her arms around it. She's done it for years. She knows what, she's got a plan. It's not, you know, there's software that lets towns plan what to pave next. She doesn't use that, but she knows what she wants to pave. She's got the numbers. So I don't know why we would be dealing with road maintenance or even sidewalk maintenance. So I agree with Andrew that what we should be dealing with is big projects like our current road project, which of course we did deal with separately. And of course she would never try to do something like that on her own. So I would separate the maintenance, which I don't think is our bailiwick, from new capital projects.
But it's still gonna appear in the capital plan. So I'm just trying to figure out how to thread that needle. I agree with you, Kathy. I really think we're in okay shape there, especially on the road side. We obviously have to deal with Quarter Hill Road, which is a one-time capital item. And we probably have some massively deferred maintenance on sidewalk. Whether it be maintenance or new, I guess we're probably mincing our words probably a little bit, but Mark, this is always gonna be in a capital item, right? Because it's gonna get carried forward every year so that Karen has the ability to not use it in 1 year. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
So it's semantics. It's just there because of that. It really is a
Yeah.
normal recurring item.
Yeah. All right.
And advisory deals with this every year. We've spent a lot of work with Karen. So I just think that we've got so much else on our plate that dealing with road maintenance is not something we should spend.
But so how do we want to deal with sidewalks? Because that's new.
Well, that's different.
That's never been.
That's different.
I think what I'll do on this, unless someone suggests an alternative path, is in prepping for the next meeting, I'll give Karen the heads up that we're gonna have questions on sidewalks. We want to understand whether these are new sidewalks that she would do with what she has for the 200,000, or this is fixing what's already in place. Because I think that may then lead us down the path of, do we bond this and do a one-time sidewalk article to get caught up? Or do we treat this much like the road maintenance every year?
Lisa, the sidewalk committee is gone, right?
Sorry, Kathy. I think it fell under Public Works Planning Board, if I'm not mistaken. That's where the study came from as well. They updated it. I could be wrong, but that's what I believe is currently the case. And I mean, there is a plan, but I know how long ago it was done. You know, it's maybe something that should be updated. I know, again, I hear all the time from people that say, you know, I'd like to have a sidewalk here. I'd like to have a sidewalk there. So, yeah, I'm just not
I
sure.
mean, you're
Kathy.
right. There's no doubt there is keen interest in getting more sidewalks at places, and there's certainly difference of opinions of where they should go. And that is capital, clearly. And that's not something you'd want DPW to make on their own. So that's my comment on that one.
Jason, will bonding boxes out of all these grant funds and section or chapter 90?
I'm not
You know?
aware of any.
Oh.
I think it actually makes us better prepared because we'd have the appropriation to move forward for whatever our match is.
Okay.
Mark, Brian, anything to add to that question?
No, I think you're right.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and then if we approach it on that, Karen did mention that she may push Quarterville Road out another year. Main reason is not because it's not ready, but because she's concerned, as many of you know, the Mass Pike overpasses are going to be replaced, I think would be basically during the same time, which would create significant disruption to that area of town. I guess what I would like us to consider is do we get the approvals in place and have it ready to go? So give me a project that's bonded, right? Brian's not going to bond it until you actually have expenses to bond against. But we don't know where these future grant cycles are going to go, right? And what, like, I still go back to what I said earlier in the meeting, and I know many of us have said it. We need to have projects ready so we're not leaving money on the table. This seems like a great example of one that, we'd be silly to push off just because there's an overpass during 8 weekends or something like that, but you could take that into account during a construction scheduling sort of thing. So that's where she was at, but I'll let her come and explain it further at a future meeting. All right, so just DPW and an email from facilities on future capital items, and that will kind of wrap up those 2 agenda items here in terms of FY22 capital and DPW. Item 10, vehicle acquisition. Andrew, did you have anything you wanted to share? I'm just going to keep this as a standing item until we dispose of it one way or another. Do you have anything you want to share updated to leasing, or I don't know if you were able to get with Brian in between the meeting, etc.
Yeah, so I had exchanged some emails with Brian, so we're just going back and forth talking about it. I'm not sure what our options are going to be on the fire truck. Maybe Brian can elaborate there, but I did reach out to the town administrator of Grafton, who did their fire truck leasing, I think 2 years ago. Hopefully she's going to set something up for late next week to talk with her about why they decided to do it, what their decision process was, whether they, regret it or like it, or, kind of understand what they did over there.
Brian, do you want to expand? And then I got a question for Andrew.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I'm sorry, Andrew. I didn't realize you were talking to Grafton because I already had a conversation with the assistant. I think it's the assistant administrator over there who
Rebecca.
handles it. And she did send me an email about a month ago. So I was going to actually do a little more research, but Grafton apparently has it as part of their capital. Towns do capital plans a little differently, obviously, each one. And Grafton has a standing lease budget. So as you know, if you do leases, you have to have it in the operating budget to pay for it. So she was just talking about that, and it's sort of a little more baked in there than a normal community, and a little more reliant on leases. And she actually said they lose money on some of them, which was interesting. They knowingly lose money on a couple of them, and they do it because they have something about the way they do their budget, and it's much easier to do a lease quickly. And it can, sometimes it's not just about the money, it's other considerations. So it was a interesting conversation, but I can share that with Andrew. And I just wanted to get a little more information on the process because it is a bid process. It's not like a private company. You can just go out and do a lease. You've actually got to bid it, award it, and have the money in the budget for, the year that the lease will be making payments on. So that was kind of why I suggested to Andrew, maybe we could follow up with this in a couple of weeks and get a little more information and then come back and have a better discussion.
So can I interject here, Andrew?
Sure. Go ahead.
So, we've been talking about this for a while, and you have made comments at meetings that implies that the lessor wants to do this with municipalities because they get some type of tax credit. Well, I'm a tax person, so I thought I had never heard of this tax credit. So I actually did a lot of research. So municipal leasing is actually very, very common. I don't think there's a credit, a dollar per dollar credit. I think what happens is you end up treating these leases as capital leases. If you remember GAAP accounting, you either got an operating lease or a capital lease. And therefore, the interest component of the lease, the lessor gets to treat as taxes and income, just like it would if it had bought a muni bond. So I think that's where the advantage to a lessor is. However, in most cases, it usually is more costly to do a lease interest rate wise, which is the whole game here, right? Is trying to cut our cost of capital. And therefore, the reason you do leases a lot of times, capital leases, things that you're going to truly keep until they fall apart, versus the street sweeper we talked about a minute ago, is because you are trying to get around the need to get the approval to get the bonds floated, which sometimes you could have trouble with. You don't have to do that with a lease. Even though it's a capital lease, as Brian said, you still put it in your operating budget as lease payments. So there seems to be something other than just saving money as far as the main reason this is done, other than those types of purchases like the street sweeper, where there really is an advantage cost-wise to buying something or doing that as a lease because you don't use it year-round. I mean, you don't run it to the ground. So it's kind of two different parts, I think, of what people do. Towns tend to never use capital leases for real estate. It's always for equipment. And it is done a lot, but it looks like it's not necessarily a financial advantage to do so if you're going to keep it till it falls apart. But I still think we should keep looking at it because maybe there's more to it. But that's what I have gleaned.
I mean, I guess, Andrew, the things that are coming to mind to me, just hearing what Kathy just said, are like these vehicles, like not the heavy equipment, right? Like these street sweepers are a good example, but also like the chief's vehicles, right? Like those are, while they're emergency response vehicles, right? They still have resale value at the end to them too, right? It sounds like we're looking for something that's not scrapped at the end. Did I understand that correctly, Kathy?
Yeah.
So,
because you're raising your lease payments less than a loan payment, like on a car, is because you're only going to pay back to the leasing company the depreciated value. So the residual you don't have to pay back. So that's why you get a lesser payment. So maybe it does work here too. I'm just still not sure, but I was surprised when I read a lot that talked about there are a lot of reasons that people do this other than simply saving money.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of an operational thing for a lot of it. And then to your point, Brian, I mean, to Jason, the vehicles are, sometimes you can get a more traditional lease where you just pay the residual, but that's a different kind of conversation. Then it's okay. Well, if you customize the vehicle, then maybe your residual isn't as good. So
you start putting lights and
exactly
decaling on it.
Okay, it gets damaged, and how much you're going to pay, and blah 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 blah. So basically, these wipe it out. It's basically a loan for the full value of the vehicle and over the course.
Just spreading it. Yeah. Okay. I think so. It sounds like you have a little more homework to do there. I will keep this on the agenda. And I think, even if, let's just say on the fire truck, for example, we decide we're just going to continue with the normal bonding, when that actually gets delivered a year from now. I think as we look out, right, like there may be, like if we get to a year where it's just the capital is unpalatable, right, and we just need to find a way to spread the payments and we don't want to bond something for whatever reason, I think we obviously have to have multiple options, available and understand the pros and cons of each.
Yep.
Okay.
Brian, have we got any pricing on what the bond on a fire truck would look like?
I don't have a current one. I can get one though. If you're interested, I can send it to you.
Just for comparison purposes.
Yeah.
In Brian, I don't know if you're in a position to answer this yet, but obviously that thing's not going to get delivered for another year. And obviously that's when payments due. Would you, if given the interest rate environment we're in now, can you bond that ahead of time, or you have to wait till you actually have a check that's due?
We could, the chief didn't think he'd have any expenses until at least mid-spring, I think, if I understood him correctly. So we probably would have to wait until sometime in the winter or spring to get some money for it, because the state does have restrictions on, they don't let you keep the money and just invest it. Because it is tax exempt, the IRS has restrictions on that. So you can only go so long before you use the money. So I'd probably do it, And obviously the rates are crazy right now, crazy low, but it would have to be like winter or springtime.
Okay,
But none of us have a crystal ball, so why would you do that? Because interest rates, they are low now, but you don't know what they're going to be in a year. They could be as low or lower. So I don't think we've ever done that, as far as I know, that is made a bet on interest rates, which is what this would be.
Yeah.
well, it doesn't sound like we have an option here until at least the spring anyways. That's when Brian has a decision to make, right?
Yep.
Well, I know some manufacturers, I don't know if the one we're looking at will give you a prepay discount. I don't know if that's something we've looked into.
Some do. I know Chief Achilles has been on record as saying he doesn't like doing that because of manufacturer volatility. If like, what if one of them went belly up during the crisis, in terms of, they'd have money that a non-finished product. I've seen other chiefs do it completely opposite. So I think it's worth a conversation, but I know that I asked that same question, why we're not maybe paying for installment plans, because there are some discounts associated there. I don't know, Brian, maybe you can take that one and talk to Chief Achilles and figure out what the best course of action there is.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Next item is land town-owned parcel discussion and link to master plan. So Lisa's going to make a presentation at a later date, but I wanted her to explain what she's coming up with, just so that the committee can weigh in on if there's anything additional you'd like to see, so that you can kind of be one and done with this, as opposed to having, an extended back and forth. So Lisa, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you. So I've been involved with a lot of these parcels. I've researched a lot of these parcels. So the analysis that I'm looking to do and present is basically, there'll be a list of all of the parcels, as well as a parcel map, so you can see exactly where they're at, because there's a lot of different parcels. Some are taken by tax taking, and some of those are just basically leftovers from subdivisions that were unbuildable. There are parcels that are under the care and control of conservation that don't have a conservation restriction on them necessarily. Some are under the Board of Selectmen. Some are just town owned. I know initially when we were looking at the public safety and potentially doing a police station, we looked at behind the dump. So it's just going to be an analysis of all the town parcels, if there's any restrictions, where they stand in the hierarchy, and basically that will lead to a discussion along with the parcel map, so you can see where they are. And some of these the board has had initial discussions on. Some of them might be worth putting out to auction, but I think it'll give you a good synopsis of where we're at on the parcels, what status the parcels are in, and the actual placement of the parcels through the map, so you can actually get a better idea.
So you're doing this for the Board of Selectmen, Lisa?
No, I was doing this initially, Kathy. I started this to have a discussion with the board. We had a brief discussion on it and never really went a whole lot further at that point, because we couldn't decide. Potentially there were so many more than the 5 parcels I had brought forward, which were tax taking parcels. So this is something that certainly can be shared with the board as well once it's complete. I know Paul Sabelli was out last week, so I'll have the updated list later today, and I can start. So my goal is to have at least something put together by the end of this week, beginning of next week, so everyone has ample time to be able to kind of go through it before our meeting.
But is your impetus for doing this to get the Board of Selectmen to look at this, to see if there's anything we can,
no.
it's for
This
us?
is from a prior meeting for us, right? Because remember, our charge is facilities and town-owned property, which would include land. So
Okay.
much like what we're doing with South Union, right? I think it's important for us to understand, A, whether there's something like Lisa said that could go to auction, but B, right, like, because that gives us maybe some cash to pay for some other things, right? And we're not using it. Or B, we're potentially looking at new buildings here in the next 10 years, right? Like, I'll throw a library as an example, right? Do we have other parcels of land to put that on if we choose not to use the current parcel that it's on? And I think it was eye-opening to me when I saw some of this on public safety building when we didn't have 60-acre golf course to put it on. But that's the impetus of it, Kathy. Because I think we need to make a recommendation related to this stuff too. Any other questions, comments, direction on that? Okay, in terms of meeting schedule, so I already highlighted the BOS meeting next week. You would, if anyone wants to join or listen live, you go in through the YouTube, sorry, the Zoom link. If you want to actually participate or like make a public comment, you use the YouTube link if you just want to listen to the back and forth. All on the 10 website. You won't get like an individualized link like you typically get for these. And then on 8/31 is the update presentation from John Butler. That is in the evening, so 7 p.m., not 7 a.m. I'm going to post that meeting today. That is going to be the sole agenda item other than just approving meeting minutes. I've reached out to Public Works Planning Board to see if they want to post a joint meeting with us, given I think they have a very vested interest in this. BOS is not posting a joint meeting. They're going to kind of all watch on their own and bring questions to a future meeting. The format that I've talked about with John Butler to date is he's going to provide as much details as he can in advance. He warned me, may not be too in advance, but he is very confident he will get us all up to speed. I think there'll be a lot of listening that night. He has promised that it will be no longer than 2 hours in terms of start to finish with Q&A time. So just in terms of budgeting time for that evening, I think he had promised a lot longer at a prior meeting. So, you know, that's his plan, is he's going to synthesize it for us, give us a commentary, a chance for comments, questions, or other items we want him to look into. And then obviously we'll open it to public comment as well. I would then think we would meet soon thereafter to discuss where we want to go with that, like what we view as in our purview, what we need buy-in from Public Works Planning Board, what we need buy-in from BOS. I think it's going to be somewhat of an intertwined web, but right now we're in kind of the circle of that web, trying to link it all together. So that's one thing in terms of meeting schedule. I do see an outside chance that we need to meet between now and then to, if anything comes up on schools in terms of how to get that off the ground, but I'll email the group at that point. Once, I'm not going to set an arbitrary date. I'll just wait to hear from Roger once they get through this week and we can decide where we go with that. Any schedule limitations or anything like that? Everyone's still pretty status quo. Okay.
Yep.
Public comment. Any public comment? Seeing none. Any other business anyone wants to raise? Okay. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Roll call vote. Braccio.
Aye.
Cook.
Hi.
Park.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Bath.
Aye.
Malinowski. Aye. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.